The cabin shimmered like liquid gold under ambient lighting, a cocoon of leather, polished brass, and whispered privilege. Champagne flutes clinked in soft rhythm as luxury hummed in the air, and everything smelled of exclusivity, except for seat 1A. Celeste Morgan sat there, still as ice, elegance wrapped in tailored silence. Her fingers rested on a silk clutch, nails trimmed to perfection, eyes unreadable behind thin, gold-framed glasses. She had ordered her meal days in advance, lobster bisque and seared scallops. It was always the same. Her ritual. Her reminder that she had arrived. But tonight, something cracked. A tray dropped in front of her with a soft thud. A plastic-wrapped sandwich. A bottle of lukewarm water. No silverware. No linen. Her brows didn't lift. Her lips didn't move. She simply turned her head, slow and deliberate, toward the flight attendant who stood rigid, arms crossed just a little too tightly. Becky Whitmore offered a brittle smile. "There must have been a mix-up in the kitchen," Becky said, voice light, condescending. "We're out of the bisque, unfortunately. But this is, still nutritious." Celeste didn't blink. "I'm sure you'll manage," Becky added, then turned without waiting for a response. Across the aisle, a man in a navy blazer chuckled. "She should be grateful. Some people board just to breathe the air in here." Celeste's fingers curled ever so slightly on the edge of her tray. Her eyes dropped to the sandwich. No condiments. White bread. A single slice of turkey. No one said a word. No one questioned anything. Because when a black woman in first class is humiliated quietly, the silence of others screams louder than any insult. A few rows back, Daniel Clean, the junior attendant, glanced up from the galley curtain. His eyes caught the moment. His lips pressed together. But he said nothing. He smoothed his name badge and adjusted his sleeves like it could wipe his guilt away. Becky walked down the aisle with the confidence of someone who had done this before. Her smile to the next guest was warm. The next tray gleamed with caviar and wine. Celeste exhaled slowly, once. Then she removed the sandwich from the tray, set it aside, and unfolded a napkin from her coat pocket. It was hand-stitched. Ivory. A quiet anchor. She placed it gently in her lap and sat back, not saying a word. Not a flinch. Not a protest. But something behind her eyes shimmered. Something no one saw coming. Aaliyah Grant, seated in 1C, turned her head slightly. She was younger, sharper, holding a tablet she hadn't touched in 15 minutes. Her gaze moved from the sandwich to Becky's retreating figure, then back to Celeste. She didn't speak either. Just tapped her fingers once on the side of the tablet. From the overhead speaker, the captain's voice cracked through the air. "We'll be reaching cruising altitude shortly. Please remain seated." The usual script. But in seat 1A, the real turbulence had already begun. People settled into recliners and luxury. But no one looked back at Celeste. No one questioned why the woman in the best seat on the plane was eating like she didn't belong. Because for them, she didn't. And yet, tucked in the lining of her clutch was a key card that bore the crest of a boardroom 10 floors above Wall Street. Her name was etched into contracts that powered their phones, encrypted their satellites, and safeguarded their nations. She was a fortress wrapped in stillness. But tonight, she chose silence not as surrender, but as strategy. Because they didn't know who she was. Not yet. Not until it was too late. Not until the hashtag carved from this moment would crash their system like a virus made of dignity. They saw a woman in seat 1A with a cheap sandwich. They didn't see the storm she carried beneath her calm. But they would. Oh, they would. Because she wasn't just another passenger. She was the reason they were all still in the air. She closed her eyes as the hum of the engines leveled into a gentle drone. The air around her felt warmer now, thicker, almost heavy. She let it settle over her like a blanket she hadn't asked for. One that smelled faintly of condescension and old prejudice dressed up as protocol. Her hands remained still in her lap. But her mind wandered to a hallway made of concrete and echoes. A place where her shoes used to click louder because she walked alone. Before the acclaim. Before the power. There was a time she stood at a university podium, offering a thesis no one believed. Until they saw their own systems fail. Then they called her back. Then they gave her titles. But the air here reminded her of that day in 2008. The hiring board. For white men and a silent woman. She had entered with charts that pulsed with vision. But they had only looked at her hair. Her skin. Her calm. She remembered the way the lead recruiter had chuckled, leaned back, and said, "You're a quiet one. We usually prefer our geniuses to come with a little more fire." She had smiled then, too. Just like now. And left the room knowing she'd be back one day, not to interview, but to audit them. Celeste opened her eyes slowly. Across the aisle, Aaliyah was pretending to sleep, her tablet dimmed, but her fingers continued moving beneath the blanket. Silent strokes. Data was already pouring in from the plane's network. Passenger manifest. Service logs. The crew's internal comms. She didn't ask for permission. Celeste had never taught her to. She taught her to read between keystrokes, to act in stillness. And Aaliyah had watched her for years, how a fortress is built not with bricks, but with boundaries. The cabin lights dimmed for the overnight portion of the flight. Champagne glasses clinked again in softer tones. Daniel passed by with a tray of desserts, real ones, the kind meant for the profiles that had checked all the boxes since birth. He paused when he reached 1A. His eyes fell to the sandwich, still untouched. Then flicked to Celeste's gaze. She looked up. "Is there something you'd like to say?" Daniel opened his mouth, but only air came out. He closed it again. Then shook his head and moved on. She didn't look away until he turned the corner. The napkin on her lap shifted slightly. Her hand brushed it. Beneath the fabric, she could still feel the edge of the letter tucked beneath her clutch. It was printed on matte white cardstock. The kind reserved for executive summaries. At the top, it read, Unified Global Carrier, Internal Review, Tier 1 Service Audit. She was en route to Geneva not for leisure. Not even for diplomacy. But for a closed-door session with heads of Europe's largest cyber defense agencies. They would discuss breach patterns, misalignment, and the silent digital wars no one saw on screens. She was the only civilian in that room. But what they didn't know, what even her assistant didn't fully understand, was that tonight's flight was part of the test. 2 weeks ago, she had agreed to be treated like just another passenger. The airline had requested a service audit using anonymous executives to assess integrity. They didn't know she chose to sit in 1A. They didn't know the woman they overlooked was the one who signed the approval for this entire program. The one who funded the biometric system now blinking quietly above every seat. But her chest ached tonight not because of that. It ached because it still hurt. Because all these years later, power hadn't shielded her from prejudice. Success hadn't insulated her from insult. The systems she helped build still cracked beneath the weight of habit and hierarchy. Becky hadn't made a mistake. She made a choice. And Celeste had seen that choice 1,000 times before, in airports, boardrooms, back doors of galas she was never invited to, until she owned the building. She touched the edge of her silk blouse. The collar folded perfectly. But beneath it, a small gold pendant rested against her skin. A gift from her mother. Inside was a photo, faded now, of 2 little girls, Celeste and her sister, seated on a stoop in Harlem, grinning with popsicles. One of them didn't make it past 22. The other had promised to build something no one could tear down. The pendant was warm now. Almost pulsing. Outside the window, stars stretched thin across the ocean. Silence returned. But it wasn't peaceful. It was pregnant. Something unspoken had been planted in that cabin tonight. Celeste could feel it pressing against the walls like a growing storm. She turned toward Aaliyah, whose tablet now blinked twice. A tiny notification. The system had logged an unauthorized change in the in-flight manifest timestamped exactly 30 minutes before takeoff. Celeste whispered, barely moving her lips. "Mark it. Don't act yet." Aaliyah nodded. Celeste returned her eyes to the plastic sandwich. The bread had curled at the corners. Her voice barely a breath, she said, "Sometimes silence is a scalpel. Sometimes it's a fuse." And this silence was both. She didn't need to scream. She didn't need to cry. She only needed to wait. Because something had already begun unraveling. And it had nothing to do with bisque. Somewhere past midnight, the cabin shifted. Not loudly, not all at once. But in the way air changes before a storm breaks. The kind of silence that listens back. The champagne was gone now. The chatter had faded into soft snores and the occasional rustle of a cashmere blanket. But row 1A remained wide awake. Daniel lingered longer than usual near the flight attendant galley. His eyes drifted to the closed curtain separating first class from the rest. He should have walked away, but something wouldn't let him. He stared at the digital screen embedded in the service wall, now dimmed but still pulsing faintly with status updates. One line blinked red, then green. Then froze. His lips parted. "That's not right," he muttered, mostly to himself. Back in her seat, Celeste sat with one leg crossed, her expression unreadable. But Aaliyah glanced up from her screen. Her fingers stopped moving. Daniel appeared beside them again. This time, slower. "Sorry to bother you," he said gently, "but I noticed something odd in the crew panel. It might be nothing. Or, maybe not." Celeste didn't respond immediately. She turned to him only after a beat. "What did you see?" His face twitched slightly. "The manifest. It logged a change, right before boarding. It says you declined your meal selection. But I saw the original order this morning. Lobster bisque and steak." It was confirmed. Aaliyah raised an eyebrow. "And now?" He swallowed. "Now it says you didn't want anything." There was a silence that lingered longer than comfort allowed. Then Aaliyah spoke, her voice neutral. "Is Becky aware of this update?" Daniel nodded. "She initiated it." Celeste's eyes didn't flicker. But something shifted in the space around her. A tension as subtle as the way glass begins to crack before anyone sees the lines. "Thank you, Daniel," she said softly. "That's all for now." He nodded and left, but not before glancing back, just once, as if realizing too late he had stepped into something far deeper than food service. When he was gone, Aaliyah leaned in, voice low. "I have a trace. Becky didn't just delete your order. She rerouted it to another passenger profile." Celeste turned slightly. "Whose?" Aaliyah tapped, eyes narrowing. "Derek Van Holt. Row 3C. CFO of the airline's parent group." Celeste's jaw tensed. Aaliyah continued, "And there's more. She filed a behavior flag on you. Said you were uncooperative and verbally cold. It's coded under Class B bias reporting." Celeste's fingers curled slightly on the armrest. That report, if processed, could flag her across the Alliance's entire international registry. Future flights. Board appointments. Even diplomatic negotiations. But Becky hadn't done it for food. She had done it to diminish. Aaliyah stared at the screen, her voice sharpening. "We can shut it down now. I can override it. Log a counterclaim. Trigger review." Celeste raised a hand gently. "No." Aaliyah froze. Celeste looked out the window again, her voice nearly inaudible. We let it stand. Every lie leaves a fingerprint. Behind her, the pendant shifted again against her skin. She reached up to adjust it, absently, but with reverence. And in that moment, Daniel, who hadn't yet sat down, saw the flash of gold. His eyes narrowed. Something in his mind tugged, a memory buried deep but urgent. Back in the galley, he opened his phone. Not the company-issued tablet. His own. Scrolling quickly, he found an old article. A photo embedded inside. There she was. Not in first class. Not in designer clothes. But standing on the steps of a burned-out community center in Detroit. One hand on a child's shoulder. The other holding up the exact same pendant. Celeste Morgan, CEO of Icarus Systems, the cybersecurity firm that exposed 3 international airline data leaks and donated all reparations to underserved youth. The headline had been everywhere, just long enough to be forgotten by those who didn't want to remember. Daniel looked up. His pulse quickened. She wasn't just a passenger. He stepped back into the aisle, his eyes finding her again across the dimly lit cabin. This time, his face didn't carry the blank professionalism he'd worn all night. It carried awe. Maybe guilt. And something else. Recognition. Back in 1A, Celeste glanced at him once, just briefly. And nodded. Not a greeting. A warning. The storm hadn't passed. It had only shifted course. The captain's voice echoed softly through the cabin, announcing descent into Geneva. Shades were drawn halfway. The sky outside was velvet gray, streaked with silver. Morning hadn't broken yet, but change was coming. Row 1A remained perfectly still. Becky Whitmore walked down the aisle like she owned it. Her heels clicked in perfect time, her lips curled with the tired elegance of someone too used to being obeyed. She stopped by Celeste's seat and leaned in slightly, not too close, never that, but close enough to be heard without drawing attention. Miss Morgan, she said, with practiced grace, we appreciate your cooperation during this flight. It's good to see passengers understand when service adjustments are necessary. Celeste didn't respond. Becky smiled. Of course, next time, you may want to book a cabin more suited to expectations. Some things are just better appreciated in business class. Aaliyah's fingers twitched against the edge of her tablet. But Celeste remained still. Becky tilted her head. Enjoy Geneva, she added, standing tall. Do try the pâté at the executive lounge. I hear it's exquisite. She turned to leave. Then stopped. A soft ping rang from the intercom. It wasn't the usual seatbelt chime. This one came from the cockpit crew line, reserved for priority messages. Daniel stepped into the aisle from the galley, his hands folded. Calm. Unshaken. Captain Langford requests confirmation for passenger clearance in row 1A, he said, voice steady. There's a verification protocol on file. Becky blinked. Protocol? For what? Daniel didn't answer her. He was already holding the sleek, dark case Aaliyah had handed him minutes earlier. He opened it. Inside was a white envelope. Not airline branded. Embossed with a silver seal, International Aviation Security and Data Governance Council. He handed it to Becky. She opened it. And froze. The document was brief. To all international crew personnel and affiliates. Subject, Anonymous Compliance Observer Program, Active Agent Notice. Passenger, Celeste Morgan. Clearance level, Global Oversight Tier 1. Role, Executive Monitor, IASC Council, partnered with Civil Air Security Watchdog. All flight personnel are to comply with confidentiality, courtesy, and full cooperation. Deviation from policy will result in administrative review, suspension, and permanent record flag. The signature at the bottom was from the chairman of the Global Air Alliance. Becky staggered slightly. Her eyes flicked to Celeste, no longer just a poised woman in a tailored suit, but a symbol of silent authority. The entire flight had been an evaluation. Not of food. Not of service. Of integrity. Celeste slowly stood. Not in anger. In presence. She adjusted her cufflink. Looked Becky in the eye. And said nothing. Silence thundered louder than outrage ever could. Daniel stepped forward again. Captain Langford also requested your badge, Ms. Whitmore. And your final incident report. I believe you logged one this morning. Becky's lips parted. There must be some mistake. I didn't. I mean, it was just. Celeste looked past her, toward the window. The clouds were clearing. Becky reached for her lanyard with trembling hands. As she unclipped it, her eyes fell once more on Celeste. You set this up. Finally, Celeste spoke. Quiet. Controlled. No, she said. You did. Becky stood frozen, the badge slipping from her fingers. Celeste turned to Aaliyah, who had risen beside her. Let's go. As they walked toward the front of the cabin, passengers stirred, sensing a shift. The man in 3C stared at the empty bowl in front of him, the one with remnants of lobster bisque, and went pale. Daniel remained behind, collecting Becky's discarded ID. His gaze was somber. But not cruel. The door to the jet bridge opened. Celeste stepped out first. The woman they had tried to diminish. And the woman who had just rewritten the rulebook without raising her voice. Behind her, cabin whispers began to ripple. But no one dared say her name aloud. They didn't need to. Because by the time the wheels touched down, everyone on board already knew. Seat 1A would never be just a seat again. Geneva's jet bridge was quiet, sterile, almost reverent. Celeste walked with slow precision, heels muffled by the carpeted ramp, her coat brushing lightly behind her like a trailing flag. Aaliyah flanked her, tablet in hand, face unreadable. The moment they crossed the threshold, two figures in gray suits nodded, discreet, respectful. They escorted them silently into the VIP corridor. No applause. No sirens. Just recognition. Behind them, inside the aircraft, the atmosphere was different. Thicker. Daniel stood by the service galley, still holding Becky's lanyard in one hand. It felt heavier than it should have. As if it had absorbed the weight of every smirk, every cold glance, every line ever delivered with clipped cruelty. Becky sat in the jump seat, spine rigid, hands clenched in her lap. The paper still trembled on her knees. Daniel turned slowly. They're reviewing your past 8 flights. Every passenger complaint. Every flagged note. She looked up. She didn't even raise her voice. That's the part that'll haunt you, he said quietly. Becky inhaled sharply. I've served in first class for 24 years. I've served heads of state. Royals. Tech billionaires. Daniel said nothing. I've seen women like her before, Becky muttered. They walk in like the room owes them something. No, Daniel replied, his voice almost gentle. She walked in like she didn't need to prove she belonged. A flush crawled up Becky's neck. She turned away. In row 3, the man with the gold watch sat stiffly, remembering his earlier scoff. His untouched champagne now felt like spoiled water. The woman in 2B reached into her purse and quietly removed a folded napkin where she'd scribbled a note about that difficult passenger in 1A, and tore it in half. The whispers spread beyond the cabin. Screens lit up. First on crew tablets. Then on airport terminals. The name Celeste Morgan popped up in private crew chats across airlines, marked with a green badge, GS-1, Global Supervisor Tier 1. It was a rank most attendants didn't even know existed. Back in the lounge, a young Swiss attendant adjusted her tie nervously as she prepared the reserved suite for a VIP she now realized wasn't just another traveler. Celeste sat by the floor-to-ceiling window, staring at the Alps beyond, white and infinite. Aaliyah sat beside her, opening a thermal case containing the meal they had packed back in New York, prepared precisely the way Celeste liked. A courtesy gesture from the chef who'd cooked for her at a UN gala. Celeste unfolded the cloth napkin, but didn't eat. Aaliyah studied her. You could have spoken up. Celeste didn't look at her. Would it have mattered? You made it matter. There was a pause. Celeste finally exhaled. It's never about the food. Or the seat. It's about the story they think they're telling you. About you. Aaliyah nodded, quiet. Celeste's gaze drifted toward the runway, where another jet taxied into position. Let them tell it, she said softly. Then we write our own. Back in the terminal, Becky stood alone outside the crew room, holding a generic rolling suitcase. No badge. No clipboard. Just silence. She turned her phone over in her palm. There were no messages, no apologies, just a single news alert. Hashtag Seat 1A trending worldwide. She never said a word, and they'll never forget her. The comments section was ablaze. Not with outrage. But respect. Story after story emerged, anonymous passengers who had been dismissed, ignored, silenced. And now, they saw themselves reflected in the quiet dignity of a woman who never raised her voice, yet shifted the atmosphere of an entire flight. Daniel passed her without a word. But as he did, he paused briefly. She didn't humiliate you, he said, gently. You did that to yourself. He walked away. Becky stood motionless. Then, slowly, she sat down. Not in defiance. In understanding. And far above them, on a quiet page within the aviation network, a new training module was uploaded. Title, Silent Power, Recognizing Dignity Beyond Uniforms. Module 1, watch the full recording of Flight New York GVA, Cabin Feed Row 1A. Required for all staff, effective immediately. The hotel suite in Geneva was quiet, washed in early morning light. Outside, snow softened the city's edges, but inside the suite, everything was crisp. Folded napkins, straight-line drapes, and a breakfast tray untouched on the glass table. Celeste stood by the window, wrapped in a long gray coat, her hair pinned up, a stillness about her that was neither cold nor closed. Just resolved. Behind her, Aaliyah sat on the couch, legs tucked beneath her, scrolling through her tablet. The world was reacting faster than either of them could follow. The hashtag had crossed 1 million mentions overnight. Celebrities were tweeting cryptic photos of airline seats marked 1A. A fashion brand had just released a limited scarf inspired by the quiet seat. But Celeste wasn't reading any of it. She turned slowly, walking to the tray. She picked up a small ceramic dish, on it, a perfect soft-boiled egg, still warm. She held it in both hands, breathing in the quiet steam. Aaliyah looked up. You remember that retreat in Kyoto? Celeste smiled, faintly. The place with the wooden floors and no electricity. You cracked an egg exactly like that. You said it was the first time in years you'd felt, still. Celeste nodded. I said I wanted to live like that every day. But the world, it doesn't give you many rooms that stay quiet. Aaliyah set the tablet down. So you created your own. Yesterday. There was a knock at the door. Celeste didn't move. Aaliyah opened it. A young woman stood outside, not more than 22. She wore a crisp hotel blazer, a name tag that read, Elise, and hands that wouldn't stop fidgeting. I was told to deliver the morning brief, Elise said, holding a leather folder. But I asked for this assignment. I volunteered. Aaliyah tilted her head. Elise stepped forward, breath catching slightly. My mother, She worked airline service for 29 years. They passed her over for promotions. She trained others who got hired above her. And she never complained. Not once. Just said it wasn't her time. She looked up at Celeste, voice trembling. But yesterday, I watched the feed. And it felt like someone had finally spoken for her. Without saying a word. Celeste said nothing. Elise placed the folder gently on the table and stepped back. "Thank you," she whispered. She turned to leave, but Celeste stopped her. "What do you want to become?" Elise paused. "The first black general manager of this hotel." Celeste nodded once. "Then you start by walking like it already happened." Elise's eyes welled, but she stood straighter, then left without another word. Aaliyah waited until the door shut. "You used to believe in war," she said. "Now you believe in presence." "I used to think I had to prove I belonged," Celeste answered. "But now I know, people just need space to remember who they already are." Later that day, at the Global Aviation Summit, a new keynote speaker was announced, unplanned, unlisted. Celeste walked on stage in silence, no spotlight, no announcement. She stood at the podium in a gray wool dress, her voice low but unwavering. "Privilege," she began, "isn't always about the seat. Sometimes, it's about the assumptions you carry into it." A hush fell. The world doesn't need louder power. It needs deeper stillness. The kind that makes people look up when you walk in. Not because you shout. But because your presence reminds them to listen. When she finished, no one clapped immediately. They just stood. And slowly, one by one, hands began to meet. Not in frenzy. In respect. Back at the hotel, a white envelope waited on her desk. No return address. Inside was a single slip of paper. "I saw what you did. I'm learning. DK." Celeste placed it beside the egg dish, then turned to the window once more. The snow hadn't stopped falling. But for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the cold. The private terminal at JFK was quiet this time of night, its marble floors catching faint reflections of overhead chandeliers. Celeste walked slowly through it, her coat flowing behind her like a shadow. She had returned early, without fanfare, declining all press invitations and interviews. The world was still buzzing with the aftermath, but she didn't owe them an encore. The same airline rep who once looked through her now opened every door with both hands and lowered eyes. The same flight number. The same aircraft class. But everything had shifted. Seat 1A had become a symbol. Not of luxury. Of something else entirely. As Celeste reached the gate, a figure rose nervously from a nearby seat. Daniel Clean. The attendant from that day. He wasn't in uniform. Just jeans, a jacket, and an expression that tried to speak 1,000 apologies with none of the right words. "I don't expect you to remember me," he said quietly, "but I just wanted to say, I stepped down. The day after Geneva. I've started working with a non-profit now. Frontline inclusion training. Volunteer first." Celeste didn't respond immediately. Her gaze rested on his eyes, not judging, just seeing. "I wanted to ask," he added, "if the silence was the message all along." She nodded once. It was never about making noise. Just about being undeniable. He exhaled, as if something he'd held in since the flight had finally been let go. Then she stepped past him, toward the boarding door. At the gate, the newest crew stood waiting. Aaliyah had briefed them all before the flight. They knew who she was. Not because of status. Because of story. As Celeste walked down the jet bridge, a small voice called after her. "Wait, Miss Morgan." It was Elise. The hotel assistant. Now in a navy blue airline blazer, holding a clipboard with trembling hands. I made it through training," she said, breathless. This is my first day in uniform. Celeste paused, a gentle smile rising. You know what I remember most about that night? Elise asked. It wasn't the speech. Or the standing ovation. It was what you told me in the hallway. Celeste raised a brow, inviting her to go on. You said, walk like it already happened. Elise stepped aside and motioned toward the open plane door. You taught me to walk like I belong. Celeste looked past her, into the cabin lit with quiet glow. She walked forward. The cabin was filled with new faces, young, old, different. A small boy tugged his mother's sleeve and pointed. Is that the lady from the video? He whispered. His mother leaned in. Yes, sweetheart. That's the woman who didn't yell, but still changed everything. Celeste reached her seat, 1A again. But someone had placed something there. A folded linen napkin. On it, stitched in gold thread. Power is not the volume of your voice, but the weight of your silence. She smiled, and sat down gently, the napkin folded into her lap like armor. As the plane began to taxi, outside the window, snow started to fall again, just as it had that day. Same season. Same flight path. But this time, the weight she carried wasn't shame. It was legacy. And somewhere, far beneath the clouds, a girl with trembling hands would walk into a room and remember her posture. Because someone once sat down in silence, and the whole world finally listened.